Okay, so we're starting off looking at the nature and character of God. See, the Bible, nowhere does it try to prove the existence of God. It just assumes that God exists, which is a pretty good assumption, especially in light of something like Romans 1, where Paul says, God has made his character clear through creation. So man is without excuse. Man should know that God exists and what he's like simply by looking at creation. It's only man in his stupidity has tried to come up with a better explanation than God of creation. And it's interesting, I was listening to an interview with one of the world's foremost atheists, Richard Dawkins, who contends that God is a myth, which is great. He's entitled to believe that, and he's a very clever chap, one of the cleverest chaps on the planet, some people reckon. And so in this interview, the interviewer said, so do you reject any concept of intelligent design? She said, well, I think I do, yes. I reject any concept of any deity. So the interviewer said, but what as we look at creation and as we look at genetics, as we look at all this, what happens if we find irrefutable evidence of a creator? And he says, well, I think that could be a possibility, because it could be that some superior alien life form created us. So Richard Dawkins actually concedes that there could be intelligent design, but he'd rather believe that it was aliens than God. So even most atheists, when pressed, would have to acknowledge that the fact that we're here is miraculous. It's interesting to me as well that many atheists reject Christianity because they cannot accept that a man was dead and came to life. They cannot accept that life would come after death. Rather, they would choose to believe that life comes out of something that's never lived. I don't know which requires more faith, but there you go. So the Bible doesn't try and argue that God exists. It simply says that's not in question. What it does do is it describes the nature and the character of God. And we need to understand, as we covered last term, that the Bible wasn't man reaching out trying to describe God. It was God reaching out and trying to describe himself to man. But we need to understand some aspects of that, and we will do that as we go forward. You know, atheism wasn't really an existing belief in the ancient world. In fact, by the time that Jesus came and the church was established, there were very few, if any, atheists. In fact, people believed in lots of gods. Atheist was actually a title that was attached to the early Christians. Does that surprise you? Because the Christians rejected all the Roman gods, who were based on all the Greek gods. And so because the Christians refused to acknowledge all these gods as real, ironically, it was the early Christians that were called atheists. So what I want to do fairly briefly, and I wish I had the slides, but you've got the notes, so that's okay, is look at the major belief systems about God. And Petrus is so clever that if you see this on video, those slides will magically appear. So let's have a look at what are the major belief systems about God. Well, first of all, one I've just spoken about, atheism. And the thing about an atheist is he studies theology. He has a theology. He has a concept about God. It's simply that his concept is there is no God. And that's where we get the word atheism. In Greek, a prefix a means without. Theos, atheism, no God. It's actually found in the Bible in Ephesians 2:12. It speaks of atheists, those who deny the existence of God. But there are different strands of atheism. There's kind of an intellectual atheism, and they will try and justify their position using rational arguments. And there's a stream of intellectual atheists, as I'm sure you're aware, that are getting more and more militant, the so-called new atheists. And they're not happy simply to say, I don't believe in God. They want to stop anybody believing in God. And ironically, one of their arguments is this, that religion is evil because over history, people have been persecuted, say, by Christianity, because they seem to attack Christianity more than any other religion, funnily enough. But Christianity has persecuted anybody who doesn't believe in Jesus. And so their rationale is, we must stop people believing in Jesus. So they want to force people to stop believing in Jesus, which is exactly what they're accusing Christians of doing and being intolerant. Anyway, so that's new atheism. And people like Julian Huxley was an intellectual atheist. He said, God is no longer a useful hypothesis. But the interesting thing is, it is impossible to prove that God doesn't exist. And atheists love to say, if you believe in God, prove that he exists. To which my answer is, prove that he doesn't. Then there's just practical atheism, which is people who aren't particularly militant, haven't necessarily thought it through, but they just kind of, leave me alone. I don't want to believe in God. And it's interesting that even some of the most well-renowned atheists who've debated and pursued the cause of atheism, if you press them, they will concede generally to this, that not only do they not believe in God, but they don't want to believe in God. Why would people not want to believe in God? Because the implications to them of God existing are very scary. See, if God exists, then it's going to affect how I live my life, what I do. I have to serve somebody. Whereas if I said there is no God, I can do as I please. So that's atheism. And then there's agnosticism. Again, the prefix a, without, and gnosticism comes from the Greek word gnosis, for knowledge. So without knowledge is the root of this word. Doesn't mean stupid people. And actually, agnosticism is often misused. So you can speak to somebody and they'll say, I'm an agnostic. And if you say to them, what do you mean by that? Generally, they would say, I don't know if there is a God. Now, for me, that's a stupid position. I have more respect for an atheist who says, I've examined the matter and I've come to the conclusion that there is no God, than somebody who says they're agnostic, I don't know if there is a God. Because that's a pretty important thing to find out about, isn't it? If you just say, well, I don't know if there is or there isn't, and I've not been bothered finding out, so I'm an agnostic, I don't have much respect for that position. But that's not true agnosticism. Most people say they're agnostic because they're just too lazy to actually, and they don't know what they believe. But a true agnostic says this, that not only do they not know if there is a God, but it is impossible to know if there is a God. They claim that if God does exist, we can have no true or reliable knowledge of him. Now, I would agree, and I'm sure you would, that God cannot be fully known. He's infinite. He's slightly smarter than we are. His ways are a mystery. God moves in mysterious ways. We don't fully understand him. And so an agnostic says, well, if I can't fully understand him, I can't fully know if he exists, and even if I do what he's like, then there's no point. And yet again, that argument falls short, because how many of you fully know me? None of you do. Even my wife doesn't. Even I don't, because my own heart is deceitful above all else. So I'm self-deceived as much as anything else. So I don't fully know you, and you don't fully know me. But does that mean we can't know each other to the point where we can have a relationship, and upon that relationship discover more and more about each other? So that's agnosticism. Then there's deism. And deism separates God from his universe. It believes in a God, but not that that God is intimately involved in his creation. One of the most famous deists in history would be Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was not, as some atheists claim, an atheist. In fact, he got very upset when people tried to label him an atheist. He believed in a deity, but he believed that this deity created the universe and then just watched it run and had no involvement and did not intervene and interfere with the ongoing behavior of that universe. And that was the thinking that helped him develop some of his theories, because he believed a logical brain was behind the creation of the universe. He believed that there were logical rules behind that universe, that the universe was something that was designed, but that all that happened in the universe was a result of that design. There are many deists around. You may have heard the phrase, the clockwork universe. And that's a phrase used by deists. It's almost like the universe is a giant clockwork mechanism. God wound it up and he just let it go. At the other end of the scale, there's something called pantheism. Pan meaning everything. And pantheism basically identifies the universe with God. God is the impersonal mind and soul of the universe. Everything is God, and God is everything. There's no distinction between the creator and the created. So, and this is broad brushstrokes. If somebody tries to nail me on the detail, they'll tell me I'm wrong. But in broad brushstrokes, Hinduism would be a pantheistic religion. That Hinduism says that basically everything is sacred to a degree, that there's reincarnation, and ultimately our goal is just to become one with the universe, with this global cosmic consciousness. A lot of New Agers just recycle Hinduism and put it in a nice fluffy package. And this whole thing of, the global cosmic consciousness and, even Mother Earth and all these concepts that, we must worship the trees and the fish and everything else because they're all part of creation. That's pantheism. Okay. It's like the Buddhist monk who ordered a hot dog and he said, "Make me one with everything." Come on, catch up. Catch up. Oh, make me one with everything. And that's the concept that we are all connected spiritually. And so if I want to worship a stone, I can worship a stone because that's part of God. And if I want to worship some 8-year-old boy who's a reincarnation of somebody, if I want to worship a cow, it doesn't matter because everything is God and God is everything. So there is no idolatry. And in fact, one of the challenges of Christians preaching the gospel in India within a Hindu or a pantheistic culture is often people will accept Jesus Christ as God, but alongside everything else that is God. They don't have a difficulty understanding Jesus as God because after all, I can be God if I like. Then you've got polytheism, which is the worship of parrots. The old ones are the best. Poly meaning many, as in a polygon. That's when your parrot is escaped. A polygon, a many-sided shape. So poly meaning many, theism, so many gods. So just as I've said, Hinduism is pantheistic, in some ways it's polytheistic. They have many gods, literally hundreds. And you've got to understand how depressing that must be. You've got hundreds of gods, you've got to keep them all happy. It must be like bigamy and polygamy. Got lots of wives, you've got to keep them all happy. God instituted a particular punishment for polygamy. Multiple mothers-in-law. And polytheism, if you speak to many anthropologists who are very secular in their thinking, they'll claim that originally mankind was polytheistic because he didn't understand anything. He went, big yellow ball must be God. Moon must be God. This must be God. And that over time, he kind of rationalized and said there's one God beyond it all. And so that monotheism was part of the development of culture and development of man from a polytheistic culture into a monotheistic culture, into a post-religious culture. And anthropologists will tell you that. If you read books, you'll read it all the time. Except more and more, the evidence is that the exact opposite is true, that man started worshipping one God and devolved into worshipping many. And if you believe the Bible, and I happen to believe the Bible, you may not, but the Bible point of view is that these days, atheists actually aren't people who worship nothing, they're just worshipping other things, whether it be money, power, reputation, sex, drugs, rock and roll. You see, man was created to worship, I believe. So we all worship something. And in fact, when you remove the one true God from the equation, you can end up worshiping many things. Then there is monotheism. Any ideas what monotheism is? One God. Mono, meaning one or single. It's a belief in one God. There are three major monotheistic religions, which are Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Absolutely. We are monotheists. Many Muslims accuse Christians of being tritheist. They say we believe in three gods, which we don't. They also believe the Trinity was made up of God, Mary, and Jesus, which is another misunderstanding that you see in Islamic literature. So tritheism is a belief in three gods. Trinitarianism. Any Trinitarians here? None? 1, 2, 3, 4, a few. Phew, thank goodness for that. A Trinitarian is somebody who believes in one God in three persons, as opposed to a Unitarian. Any idea what a Unitarian is? One God in one person. How many of you understand the Trinity? Hands down, you don't. Okay. We will cover the Trinity in a future week, okay? And I will explain it to you so that you still don't understand it. But then there's something else, and I want to touch on this, which is not a word you will hear often, but it's monolatry. Now let's see who's clever. Any ideas what monolatry is? If you look at the word. Mono is one. Latry, is it a latrine? Is it one toilet? I don't know. No, monolatry is kind of a combination between monotheism and idolatry. And the best way I can explain this is generally what Israel fell into in the Old Testament. That there wasn't really a point where Israel said, Yahweh isn't God. They were always followers of Yahweh. They never said Yahweh doesn't exist. Some individuals might, but collectively, they still, in theory, worship God, but in practice, worshipped many idols as kind of secondary gods. And so God was simply one way of worship that was above the others. So even the Israelites in the desert, when Moses was up the mountain, they understood that Moses was busy talking to God, but yeah, while he's there, give us a God we can see. And so they worshiped the golden calf. They weren't saying God doesn't exist. They said, we'll just worship something we can see while we wait for Moses. And actually, I think monolatry is very common today in the church. That you speak to Christians and all say, yes, I believe in God, I follow God. But actually what they worship is other things. You'll see it very clearly, and we are a predominantly white audience this evening, so you will see it very clearly in some of the African traditional churches, like the Zionists, where they will believe in God and they'll believe in scriptures, but they will also venerate their ancestors. And we go, shock, horror. How is that possible? How is it possible that people who say they follow Jesus still venerate the ancestors? That is disgusting. And I think in many ways it is to God. And yet we as white people have our own culture that we're so soaked in, we don't recognize we do the same thing. So we follow God whilst we also venerate consumerism and materialism. And the only reason it's not so shocking to us is because that's the goldfish bowl we are in. And, you know, I say most Christians define really bad sin, because we have a hierarchy of sin, don't we? Some sins are worse than others to us. Do you know which are the worst sins? The ones you don't do. Am I right? Why is it in so many churches, so many Christians are so gung-ho about homosexuality being such a terrible sin? Because I don't wrestle with that, so it's so easy to condemn people who do. But greed, pride, ooh, that's a bit too close to home, so that's not too bad. Do you understand what I'm saying? We are so locked into a culture and in a way of thinking. We need to be transformed, as Romans 12 says, by the renewing of our mind and make sure we don't fall into monolatry. Does that make sense? Anybody need to repent? Anybody want to get saved? Okay, I see that hand. So the question is, can we know God? Is it possible to know God? Well, there's two answers to this question. The one answer is yes, and the other answer is no. And I'm going to deal with the no first. You see, God is incomprehensible. We can never fully answer what God is like. No matter how hard we try to describe him, we'll fall short. I love the fact that when I read Ezekiel, for example, or the book of Revelation, where men are taken up and given a picture of heaven, they try and describe that. And as they try and describe it and put it into paper, we're reading it going, what? You read Ezekiel chapter 1 and you go, what? Wheels within wheels and thrones on wheels and things with wings and eyes in their armpits. And I mean, this is just weird. Come on, who's ever thought that? Come on, be honest. I know we're in church, but you're allowed to be honest. Who's ever read Ezekiel chapter 1, that whole passage, and gone, this is just bizarre? In fact, I was reading an atheist website, and they said, this is what Jesus looks like according to the Bible, and it was a sheep with 7 eyes. And I said, do you not understand metaphor, guys? I mean, that's just dumb for the sake of being dumb. You know? So Ezekiel and John in Revelation, they have these descriptions of God and even of heaven and even of created beings that are so glorious they can't put it into words. And what I love is at the end of chapter 1, Ezekiel says, and this was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. He doesn't even say this is God or this is the glory of God. This was an appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. And I still can't describe it. One of my concerns in much of the church today, particularly in our worship, a lot of the worship songs that are written today are, me and Jesus, we're like this, we're best friends, you know, I love you so deeply, and we stare into one another's eyes. And that is true. We have an intimate relationship with Jesus, but we can't understand how blessed we are to have an intimate relationship with him if we do not understand just how big and awesome and scary and incomprehensible God is. And just in case you're of the persuasion that as Christians, once we come into him, we no longer need to fear him, because that is a theology that's going around today, isn't it? We don't need to fear God because we're his children. Isaiah 11 tells us that Jesus had a fear of God, the perfect child who never sinned. It's good to have a fear of God. And we can only have a fear of God if we understand he's bigger than we can imagine. In fact, Paul writes this, consider then the sternness and the kindness of God. See, you don't understand the kindness of God unless you understand his sternness. Unless you understand what you deserve, you cannot understand how kind he's been to you. If you don't understand his awesome, majestic holiness, you can't understand his loving kindness. A man called Epictetus. Anybody else called Epictetus here? I don't want to confuse anybody. He said this, were I fully to describe God, I should myself be God, or God must cease to be what he is. Thomas Watson, one of the Puritans, said, we can no more search out his infinite perfections than a man on the top of the highest mountain can take a star in his hand. So the greatest theologian that ever lived. And sometimes you read books and they try and describe the awesome majesty of God, and you read them and you go, wow, this guy's got incredible, profound insight. And the greatest guy who's ever lived, who's had the greatest awe-inspiring revelation of the greatness of God, is about as close to touching him as a man on Table Mountain is to touching a star. That's how far short we fall. There was another famous theologian called Mike Davies who said, we cannot fathom the mysteries of the created universe. How much less then can we fathom the mysteries of the creator of that universe? We've explored something like less than 1% of our known universe in terms of the most powerful telescopes. And even that less than 1%, scientists still don't understand. They're still trying to work it out. They've built billion-dollar machines in Switzerland called the Hadron Collider to try and figure out what makes up an atom. How vain is it to try and understand the God who put all that in place with a word? It wasn't even hard work for him. He didn't even break sweat. And so God is transcendent. He's above and over creation. He's the creator. Everything else is created. God cannot be equated to anything else. Imagine, for example, you've never seen a bunny rabbit. And I start talking to you about a bunny rabbit. You're going to say, what on earth is a bunny rabbit? And I'm going to describe it to you. And how am I going to describe it to you? Well, it's like a rodent. And it's got ears, but they're pointy. And it's got this little twitchy nose with whiskers like a cat. And it's got a tail, but it's not a tail like it's like a... And I'm describing the bunny rabbit in terms of reference of things you've previously seen. Yeah? When I speak of God, I cannot describe him in terms of things that you've already seen because he is so different and separate to everything that's been created. Now, there's something of him in creation, like I said earlier, so there's certain glimpses of him we can get by looking at creation, but there's nothing else like him to compare him to. Isaiah says that, to whom can God be compared? How can you describe what he's like? To whom can the holy God be compared? Is there anyone else like him? And sometimes we think of God like a guy, only a bit bigger. God is not a man. He is so much more than that. But you see, if we only look at his transcendence, if we only look at his incomprehensibility, we end up with deism. Because he's just so big, there's no way we can understand him. There's no way we can connect with him. There's no way he can be involved with us because he's just so big and so awesome. And so we've got to understand that whilst he's transcendent, he's also imminent. He is close. He is involved with us. The Bible teaches this, that God is involved with and present in his creation. Ultimately, of course, God has chosen to reveal himself to us, and the ultimate answer to what is God like is to look at Jesus Christ. When Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. In 1 John, it says, we know that the Son of God has come and has given us understanding so that we know the true God. We live in union with the true God, in union with his Son, Jesus Christ. This is the true God, and this is eternal life. So what could be more intimate? What can be more revealing? What can be more imminent than God coming in the flesh, living as one of us, dying for us, and then pouring his Spirit into us so that we can have intimate relationship with him. And this is the God who put the universe in place with a word. See, if we take imminence too far, we end up with pantheism. Everything is God and God is everything. If we take his transcendence too far, we end up with deism. But if we hold both together, we have a healthy understanding of our God and our place in his universe. Our only conclusion can be that two facts exist simultaneously. Our God is incomprehensible and our God is knowable, all at the same time. And so as we move forward, and I've used this before, but we need to understand that when we look at God and when we try to understand God's ways, when we're trying to get our heads around what he is like, we need to have a theology, not a me-ology. Too many people have a me-ology. So when it comes to suffering, they can't understand God because it's all about me. And the difference between theology and me-ology is the same as the difference between a dog and a cat. Okay, so a dog has a theology. A dog says, you feed me, you take me for walks, you give me a home to stay in, you pat me, you must be my owner. Where a cat has a me-ology, and a cat says, well, you feed me and you give me a place to stay and a warm bed, I must be a cat. And too many of us have a me-ology. It revolves around me, and I need to understand what is God's place in my universe. A theology is what is my place in God's universe. Emil Brunner said this, the better we know God, the more we know and feel that his mystery is unfathomable. Have you ever felt that? Like, it's interesting, the one time I was putting my daughter to bed, she must have been 3 or 4. And my wife's grandma had just died. So we're lying in bed, I'm putting her to bed, and she said, Dad, has Durban Granny, is she with Jesus now? I said, yes, she's with Jesus. She said, and does Jesus live inside of us? Guess what's coming next? But you see, the gospel, the truth about God, the fact that we can relate to him and have a relationship with him, even the youngest of children can get that. And they're not hung up about, the hypostatic union, which we'll talk about in a future week. They're not bothered about all the mystical, deep theological issues. They're just like, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. And that's the most profound theology that there is. I can't teach you anything more profound than that Jesus loves you. The Bible tells you. But in that relationship, the more I know him, the more I see his depths, the more I see his awe, and the more my mind is blown by the greatness of the God that I serve. So what is he like? What is God like? Well, first of all, we need to say that God is a personal, self-sufficient, self-existent spirit. Okay, God is personal, self-sufficient, and self-existent spirit. And we're going to go through those points in reverse order, just to confuse you. So God is spirit. Let me ask you, does God need a material form in order to exist? Does he need a body? Does he need a physical body? Does he have a gender? Not does he have an agenda. Does he have a gender? Is he male, female? Because if he doesn't have a body, how can he be? And if he's male, why does it say in Genesis that man and woman were created in his image? Confused yet? You will be. You see, I can argue that God is spirit, but why then does the Bible say God stands, God sits, that Jesus is at God's right hand? Surely he's got a right hand then. If he doesn't have a right hand, where's Jesus sitting? Well, what about the footstool? Surely he must have feet if he's got a footstool. So what's all this about? If God doesn't have a body, what's all this talk about a body? Any ideas? It's terms we would understand. He's revealing himself in a manner that we can comprehend. The technical word for it is anthropomorphism. And just so that you can get it, one of the world's greatest experts on anthropomorphism was Walt Disney. Okay. What was Walt Disney a genius at doing? Creating cartoon animals that acted and emoted and behaved like humans and had conversations. And you're watching this cartoon, and halfway through you don't realize it's a talking mouse, for goodness sake. Because what is he do? He's putting human characteristics into something that isn't human. And so God uses anthropomorphisms. He describes himself in ways that humans can relate to. So what do you think it means when it says Jesus is at God's right hand? Maybe you've never thought about this before. But what is your right hand? In human terms, what is it to sit at somebody's right hand? What does it mean to say somebody's my right-hand man? He's my second in command. He's trusted. He and I have an agenda, and he works it out. He's trusted. He's part of the team. It doesn't mean he's literally a man made out of my right hand. That would just be freaky. What does it mean to say God would stand? You can visualize something. I can understand the emotion. I can understand what's going on here. And ultimately, again, if you want to take all these things literally and say, but it's in the Bible, he's got an arm and a leg, then you've also got to believe he's got wings. Maybe you've got to believe that when Jesus comes again, he literally has a sword sticking out of his mouth, which would make it really hard for us to understand what he has to say to us. I hope I'm not being blasphemous, but you understand what I'm saying. There's language in the Bible that isn't necessarily meant to be taken literally. And in fact, we know that it isn't because the Bible clearly teaches that God is spirit. John 4:24 tells us that. Romans 1:20 tells us that. Colossians 1:15, 1 Timothy 1:17. All of these scriptures make it quite clear that God is spirit. He's not composed of matter. And that doesn't matter. He doesn't have a physical nature. Now, our problem is that we've been brought up to believe that this stuff is real, and if you can't touch it and feel it, it's somehow less real. Anybody here understands quantum physics? I don't. I have no clue about quantum physics, but when I speak to people who do or read things by people who do, they'll tell you that actually nothing is real, that it's all just energy. In fact, how many of you have seen a picture of an atom in a book? Have you noticed that there's more space than stuff in an atom? It's a couple of little blobs with lots of space in between. What are you made up of? Atoms. So actually, you're more space than stuff. Is anybody feeling a bit freaked out right now? And in fact, are you the same person you were a week ago? Because half your cells have died and been replaced since then. So what's real? How real is it? But Hebrews 11 tells us this about faith, that God, all that is visible, was created out of that which is invisible. And that one day all of this will be burned up, but that which is invisible will remain. In other words, we need to understand that the invisible is more real than the visible. Am I right? Go and read a book on quantum physics and really melt your brain, then we'll come back and have the same conversation. But we need to understand that because something is spirit does not make it less real. And we've grown up in a very materialistic society. And by materialistic in this context, I don't mean wanting stuff. I mean believing in what is material. If I can't touch it, if I can't feel it, it's somehow not real. God is most definitely real. We have to say that logic tells us that God doesn't have a physical body as well. The logic goes like this. God is omnipresent. What does omnipresent mean? Present everywhere at the same time. Do you want me to really melt your brain? I'm going to really melt your brain on this one, okay? And we'll talk about it. I'm going to melt your brain and we'll explain it in a couple of weeks' time. Omnipresent doesn't mean there's a bit of God everywhere. It means all of God is everywhere. So it doesn't mean his big toe is here and his armpit is in China and his forehead is in the Milky Way. All of God is here right now. And all of God is in China. And all of God is holding the universe in his hand. But it means more than that. It means that all of God is present everywhere at all times simultaneously. So in other words, all of God right now is present here, and all of God is present right now 1,000 years from now. And 1,000 years ago. Otherwise, how could we say that Jesus was the lamb slain before the foundation of the world? So, omnipresent means not just present in all places, but present at all points of time. You see, God isn't restricted by time. God created time. Time is a function of a created universe. Gravity affects time. Going back to Einstein again. How many of you saw Interstellar? That whole wormhole time. See, time needs creation. God is outside of creation. God created time. So God is present at all points of time simultaneously. So how could it be, for example, that Jesus, when he walked this earth as a man, said, where 2 or 3 gathered, there I am? Because he had a physical body. So how could he be everywhere? Well, he could be everywhere because before he was born, he was already present in Palestine 2,000 years ago as spirit, because he was pre-existent. He existed before he came as a man. So Jesus was present in the spirit at his own birth as a man. Does that make sense? Or how many of you are beginning to drool? See, I'm saying this not to explain something to you. I'm actually saying this to try and confuse you. Not to confuse you, but to give you a sense of, wow, I thought I understood God, but he is way beyond my understanding. So God does not have a physical body. God is spirit. So understand for a second what a sacrifice it must have been for Jesus, who is by very nature God, in every way God the same as the Father is, a pre-eternal spirit being, voluntarily choosing to take on the form of a man. Think how confining it must be to confine yourself to a physical body if you're a spirit being. And here's the real kicker. That was the decision he made for whole time. Because Jesus has still got a physical body. And when he comes again, he will come with his physical body. And he will reign with us in his physical body. Now, even if he hadn't died, even if he hadn't been crucified, just that choice alone was a heavy, heavy price beyond our understanding. And so we can say God is spirit and does not have a body apart from the fact that Jesus came in the flesh. But that was a condescension. That was a choice to limit himself. It wasn't that by nature he had a body. Have I lost you all? Are some of you still with me? Anybody still with me? Hands up if you're still with me. Okay, that's great. Whew. So there's anthropomorphisms. There's another explanation as well, what we call theophanies. And a theophany is an appearance of God in human form on earth. So throughout the Old Testament, we see people who have conversations with God, who see God, who experience God. And what we will do at some stage is we'll show how the vast majority of those appearances are actually Christ who appeared to man before his incarnation in the flesh. But if God is spirit, does that mean he cannot manifest in a form that we can see and experience? Of course it doesn't mean that. He can manifest himself in any way that he chooses. And in fact, he did so for the Israelites as they wandered through the desert. The Holy Spirit guided Israel through the desert. And how did they know that he was guiding them? Anybody? A pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. Does that mean the Holy Spirit is a pillar? No, the Holy Spirit is spirit, but manifested himself for man's benefit in a particular way so that man could have an experience. And maybe there's something as an aside here, not in terms of physical appearance necessarily, but if God can choose to manifest himself in any way that he wishes in order to take us forward into the things of God, why would we restrict him in our meetings to say, he's only allowed to manifest in certain ways that we've predetermined are biblical? God is creative and can manifest in many ways in order to teach us. Because God is a great teacher and he knows that we learn visually. So he will do things often visually because that's a much better way for us to learn and to remember. It's interesting that Mormonism contradicts the teachings of the Bible and says that God has a body. They even tell you how tall he is and what he looks like. But that is typical of many cults and many false religions. You see, here's the thing that man must do in order to avoid submitting to a holy God. Man must lower God to his own level or elevate himself to God's level. And it's interesting that in Mormonism you have both. Because Mormonism will teach that Jesus was just a man who became a God, and then teach that you are a man who, if you're a good Mormon, you too can become a God and have your own little planet. Did you know that? You can have your own little planet, and your wife can be with you, and you can make her pregnant and have millions of spirit babies who will then populate a planet and worship you. And they will teach that their God was once a man who became God through his obedience, which is exactly what happened to Jesus. He was a man who became a God. Just because when he said, I only do what the Father did, his father was once a man who became a God, whose father was once a man who became a God. And so Mormonism, that's just one clear example. But every cult and every false religion essentially has to do that. Elevate man or denigrate God. So God is spirit and God is personal. Now, by personal in this context, and I will break in 2 minutes, by personal in this context, I don't mean like Jesus Christ is your personal Lord and Savior. Personal means he is a person. He has a personality. Now, the difference between you and God is that your personality isn't perfect. God is. Human personality is ever growing and changing, but God doesn't grow and change because he's perfect and infinite. But we see in the descriptions of God that he is a person. See, God has a will. We see that in Ephesians 1. God has intelligence. See that in 1 Corinthians 2. God has emotions. 1 Peter 5, verse 7. So what makes up a person? What makes somebody a person? Is it having a body? Well, if it is, then many people are in trouble, because if having a body makes you a person and you lose a leg, does that make you 3/4 of a person? There are some extreme people who would say so. And they would argue for euthanasia or the killing of infants on the basis of they're not physically or emotionally or intellectually up to a standard that we deem appropriate. But your level of intellect isn't the determining factor of whether you're a person. Having a body is not the determining factor of whether you're a person. What makes you a person is that you have a mind, a will, and emotions. And in that sense, you are created in the image of God. Now, by accepting that God is personal, we're freed from any hint that God is simply like this global cosmic force, man. It's like this global cosmic consciousness. You know, if God is just like this cosmic consciousness, how can it decide what to reincarnate you as? Who's been good and who's bad? Well, who decides? This cosmic consciousness. How does it decide? Because it's not personal. If we see God as personal, then we realize that he is not something to be manipulated or used, but someone to whom we should rather submit and worship. T.C. Hammond said this: "It is our knowledge of his being personal that saves us from frigid and barren reflection on the infinitude and absolute sovereignty of God." See, a lot of theologians sit in their little ivory towers and have these deep, meaningless theological debates, which are absolutely meaningless because they've lost sight of the fact that the ultimate purpose of theology is to connect us in relationship with the God who loves us. It's not an abstract concept to debate, but a person to submit to and to be worshipped. And then, just quickly, God, the third aspect, God is self-sufficient. He is independent. We exist for God. God does not exist for us. There is nothing that we have, nothing that we can do that God needs. God does not need you. If he chooses to use you, it's not because he's somehow incapable of doing it without you. It's rather like when my daughter, I was painting her bedroom and she said, "Daddy, can I help?" And I said, yes. And I knew by her helping, it would take me twice as long, be twice as messy, and probably twice as expensive. So why did I say, yes, you can help me, when deep down I knew it would be no help at all? Because in helping me, it formed a relationship with us two that was stronger. If God chooses to use you, it's not because he's incapable without you. It's that by using you, he draws you closer to himself. God has no lack. In fact, there's one book that I've read that I hate with a passion. I've never finished it. It may be really good in the end, but the first 2 chapters are so bad for me, and I'm not saying you're not allowed to read. I'm just saying for me, I've never got past chapter 2. And that book is a very well-known book called The Divine Romance. Who's read The Divine Romance? And here's why I hate it. Because the first 2 chapters are, God was in the universe and he was all alone. And he said, I need somebody to relate to. I'm all lonely. And then he had this great idea. Let me create man because I need somebody to love. God is not Freddie Mercury. He wasn't there in eternity saying, find me somebody to love. God eternally within the Godhead had a loving relationship within the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He didn't need us. Any teaching, I think, that somehow puts us at the center and says God needs us is very dangerous. We need to soberly examine the truth of Scripture that says that all that we can give him is what he gave us first. There's nothing you can give God that isn't his. That he is to be worshipped not because he needs it. He's not insecure. I better create billions of people to worship me because I've got a self-image problem. We worship him because he is worthy to be worshipped. We worship him because it is our responsibility to respond in obedience and to a revelation of who he is. And God is self-existent. Apart from God, nothing was made. God is the reason for his own existence. God lives for no one and depends upon no one. He is self-existent. So here's the deal. God is eternal, you are not. Anybody eternal here? No, because you had a beginning, God didn't. You can go, but Mike, I'm going to live forever. And I'll say, yes, you will. So you have everlasting life. But here's the thing about that. God is eternal. Nobody sustains his existence. You will have everlasting life, not because you are eternal, but because he is, and he will sustain you for eternity. Now, that's a beautiful thing, that God will sustain you to have a relationship with him for all eternity. The sobering thing is, those who reject him will be sustained in a godless state by him for all eternity. I think it's wise to have a fear of God, who is, as we said at the beginning, let me get this right so I don't mess it up. God is a personal, self-sufficient, self-existent spirit. So take a break and then we'll look at the nature of God.